Hi everybody, welcome to another Chats with Chaudhry. I hope you're safe and well. Today I'm carrying on my reflection and forecast 2022-2023 interview series with senior executives across the life science, pharma and biopharma sector. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Tina Morris, who's the executive director at the American Association of Pharmaceutical Scientists, if I get my teeth in right, or AAPS for short. And today we're going to look back on 2022 and how the industry was impacted and what trends arose out of that. A little bit more about AAPS and also how they managed 2022 and look ahead to 2023 and what some of the big trends we might expect to see this year. So Tina, first of all, it's lovely to see you. How are you?
I'm very well, Rizwan. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be in your program, and happy to have this conversation.
Fantastic, Tina. Well, look, first of all, we were just talking off camera because Tina's actually in sunny Florida, and she was boasting, or maybe not boasting, but she was very pleased that it's one of the parts of the States which is actually warm. Is that correct, Tina? So you're still sunny where you are today?
It is. I'm very fortunate to be in southern Florida today because we have an epic cold wave sweeping across the rest of the country.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. Well, it's a bit overcast and getting a bit dull here in the UK, but never mind. I'm very jealous. Now, before we start talking about 2022, though, for people not familiar with AAPS and what your reason for being is and what you do, perhaps you could give viewers a very quick overview of who AAPS are and what you do.
Sure, I would be happy to. The American Association of Pharmaceutical Scientists was founded in 1986 and is an individual member-based organization of over 7,000 members that come together from literally all the different areas of the pharmaceutical sciences. I would say we are about 70% industry, and 30% academic and government. And we literally cover the entire pharmaceutical sciences waterfront. And also, I would say, a very, very large range of career stages. We have many members who joined AAPS as graduate students and then have risen to the ranks of pharmaceutical executives or, academic leaders in their field. And so we have, I would say, a huge bench depth of expertise that we bring to the conversation.
One question I was going to ask you, which just came into my head, is that obviously we've seen a shift in terms of new therapies coming into the marketplace over the last few years. And certainly since I've been working within the pharma space, for want of a better term, in 2016, BioPharma was coming to the fore. And then obviously now we're talking about ATMPS and cell and gene therapy. So how has that impacted in terms of the membership and where the membership works?
That's a great question, Rizwan. I think we've seen it. We have seen definitely a shift in the conversation. I think the most immediate place where we see changes is what our scientific volunteers, committees, planning committees, our scientific advisory committee, our board of directors, what they give emphasis to in planning our conferences, but also what is being really brought forward as conversation topics in our AAPS scientific communities. So we see an emphasis shift there. We have a scientific advisory committee that is spending a lot of time thinking about where to put emphasis, how to curate our science. And one way they think about it and talk about it is that you sort of have these core disciplines that are still very, very important, that continue and that are, obviously very small molecule centric. But you have these emerging disciplines that support new therapies that are coming into our fold, into our organization, many times through young researchers. We have also seen, obviously, a global shift because some areas of expertise, some technologies, some science is now happening in different parts of the world. it's a very interesting development.
Right, fantastic. Right, let's talk about 2022. And my first question is, how would you describe 2022 in one word and why?
Exciting. I would describe it as exciting because for us it was we had a couple of milestones. We brought the National Biotechnology Conference back in person in Anaheim last year, which I think was, for the people who were attending and planning the meeting for the first time, was a huge milestone. For the people who are older, like myself, who remember when the National Biotechnology Conference was at AAPS before, it was kind of a happy rebirth and really a homecoming to this meeting. And then, of course, we had a tremendously successful return to in-person in Boston with the Pharma 360 meeting. The meeting exceeded our expectations literally in every regard. You were there, you heard, you saw the buzz. It was just wonderfully overwhelming, I have to say. So it was a really exciting year. We made so much progress last year in many regards in terms of new topics, new things we're doing in terms of how AAPS keeps evolving. So I would say it was a very exciting year.
Well, fantastic. And you have obviously covered some of this in my next question, but what were some of the achievements apart from then the two things that you mentioned just there?
I would say just also continuing our journey in really being with our year-round offerings. I would say our goal really is to continue to have these year-round engagements, exciting, cutting-edge conversations for our members and for our partners all year round. I think over the years, AAPS has really successfully evolved from a scientific society that was very heavily focused on one conference. And I think we've really, with everybody's engagement and passion, evolved into a very, very strong organization that has these very high quality scientific discussions going on all year round. We keep adding new offerings. I would say we've been very successful in making the transition from in-person to digital and virtual so that we could stay on the air during the pandemic. And now we've been very, very successful in coming back in person. There was so much energy, people coming back. But I think I'm also very proud about how our volunteer leaders now really think about our space kind of multidimensionally. They use the virtual world differently because they know it's very important for our global reach and getting those experts online that can be somewhere in person. But they're also incredibly happy, including myself, to be back in person and making those immediate connections. And so I feel like we've expanded our organizational brain during the pandemic, and we've been very fortunate to bring our members and our partners along with it.
Well, that's very interesting you to say that, and I would agree 100%. And I do think I was going to ask you, but you brought it up anyway, was that did you think that the pandemic had forced you as an organization to become more than just an event, as you just said, yes, and become more of a 365, as everyone likes to use that term, yeah, but a 365 organization where you are offering services and solutions and helping members throughout the year, rather than just saying we're focusing on big conference every year. That's our big thing. Everyone's got to be there. But now I think the pandemic has forced you and everyone basically who have done events, whether associations or commercially doing events, to think more on a much annual basis, if you like. You don't want all your eggs in one basket anymore. But you've also attracted, as you said, through virtually, a new audience, because you've got a global audience now rather than just a national audience as you would have had previously.
Yes, and that's definitely true. And I would say AAPS was already on that journey before the pandemic, which was fortunate for us because that strategy was already started. But I would say the pandemic definitely accelerated that and kind of forced us to be much, much more nimble and deliberate about how we think about our programming, how we think about reaching our members, how our members communicate with each other, and how we support that as a membership organization.
Great. Now, looking from an industry perspective, what challenges do you think the sector and your members faced in 2022? And were there any developments which stood out for you last year within the sector?
I would say that 2022 and people coming back, I would say to, pre-pandemic ways of working. And I think a lot of our members and their organizations really were faced with making choices, where to put their resources, which of the pandemic learnings and ways of working to carry forward into the post-pandemic space, what has happened in different parts of the world, how many pieces of the supply chain have been reestablished, what parts of the pandemic ways of working are not relevant anymore that we stopped doing. So I think there's been a lot of evaluation going on. And I think something that we have seen and that still carries forward for in-person interaction, for travel, for a lot of things, there's still what we would call a regionalization going on, that especially international travel, international participation, I think especially in the industry, on the industry side, but also for regulatory participants, that hasn't come back to pre-pandemic levels. And I think people think differently about how they do business now, how they reach their stakeholders, how they talk to them, and how they use their resources, basically. I think that has, some of these things have probably changed forever.
Well, that's a very good point, actually. So, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, but did you, based on what you just said, do you think the profile for Pharmacide 360 last year had changed from what the profile was pre-pandemic? Because you were just saying about, not just about the numbers of people coming internationally, but more in terms of the type of people who were coming to the event.
Yeah, definitely. We have seen some subtle changes, and of course, some of it also is always dependent on the topics we cover, where we are in the country with our meeting. We were in Boston, which is a huge pharma hub, right? And so you already see sort of what I would call a micro regionalization already there, because people are there, it's close. But this is something we're definitely watching very closely, and I think that we think about, and that our planning committees think about for sure. I mean, not just in terms of our industry participants, but also, of course, the academic centers of excellence. And it's something that we're paying attention to, something that's been very challenging for for our academic participants, our students, is that international travel and visa requirements and applications are still slow. So, we have a lot of posters at Pharmsci. You saw that we have in excess of 1,000 people participating at that level, and many of them internationally. For many of them, it's the first big international meeting, and as a graduate student or a postdoc, and many of them still had challenges, and there were some really close calls on getting your visas and getting into the country. So those are still challenges we're seeing, and those are things we're thinking about. Our planning committees have to think about it also in terms of some of the high profile regulatory speakers, because not just in terms of travel, but the regulators have been really, really pushed by the pandemic response, right? They have just been extraordinarily busy, and it's been more challenging than usual to get that same in-person participation from some of our typical high-level regulatory colleagues.
Right. Now, my final question related to 2022, though, is are there any areas that you think that the industry could have improved upon last year?
I think our industry is always challenged to improve, right? And I think this is something, that we talked about quite a bit, I would say, is an increasing conversation over the last year is the question about funding, right? How is innovation funded going forward and into the future? We had actually a dedicated session at PharmSci about funding opportunities. Yep. How do you fund your innovation, right? And we had some very interesting discussions around that. And I think it's going to be an ongoing challenge over the next years is how do you keep that innovation market vital in areas that where stuff needs to happen, where we also worry about some of the government funding being dialed back, right? You know, the pandemic is behind us. A lot of the innovation on infectious diseases, vaccines, pandemic response is government funded innovation, right? And is the private sector going to pick that up? What is that going to look like? What is the mix of large pharma versus small companies going to look like? How can small companies, new innovators coming into that space, how can they be efficient and make their dollars last, right? And how can that industry be sustainable?
Right. Okay. Yeah. And I think funding is a huge issue for a lot of companies at the moment, and particularly in the biotech space, as we know. Looking ahead then to 2023, what are your sort of big picture predictions for BioPharma Pharma then? You know, what do you see some of the big things happening or big trends that people should look out for this year?
I think there's going to be a lot of companies are going to look at their portfolios, right? I think there's going to be a look at, you know, a refocusing or a reinvestigating their portfolios, because I think the pandemic has really shifted priorities in a lot of companies. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what types of acquisitions might happen in that innovation space, right? I'm very excited about, you know, some of these, I would say previously very, very new technologies like lipid nanoparticles, these delivery platforms for nucleic acid-based therapies. They have kind of, I wouldn't say they have gone mainstream yet, but post-pandemic, what are those technologies going to be applied to? And so I'm very excited about these platform technologies that have come out of I would say the accelerated development through the pandemic, and see them applied to other fields, to you know, oncology, obviously, to rare diseases. And what are those portfolios going to look like? And what is going to happen in the advanced cell and gene therapy space, right? There's a lot happening. That's a very, very heavy focus of our National Biotech Conference in the spring. There's a lot of challenges still in the CMC space. That's my expertise, so I'm probably paying a little bit more attention to it than other people. But how do you manufacture these therapies? How do you, what are the remaining regulatory challenges? How do you tackle those? What's going to make them mainstream, right? And so those are some things that I look forward to learning more about.
Right. And in terms of drug development itself, I mean, what sort of trends and developments do you see around that?
I would see a lot of companies looking to apply some of the learnings, how to accelerate speed through the pipeline, how to be more efficient about it. Again, you know, when you see a projected contraction in the funding development, you have to make your development dollars go further. So I would say that a lot of companies are getting smarter about it. I would say that tackling global challenges in terms of, you know, post-approval changes, you know, how do you further harmonize requirements? I think we've seen some big guidelines launched, you know, the M10 implementation, ICH, And then I think we're going to have a lot of discussions about, you know, the FDA guideline that's not going to require animal studies for tox. So I think there's going to be that's going to have an impact on how people design their drug development. It's going to have an impact on the costs, the timelines, et cetera. And then the other thing I would say is what's going to happen to the global supply chains, right? And how is that developing? What has the impact, the lasting impact been from the pandemic? How is that recovering? And what how is that impact from early development all the way through mature drugs? Because depending on what type of modality we're talking about, it's an entirely different market and it's an entirely different scenario.
Right. Now, a couple of things I wanted to ask you about, though, as well, looking at trends. Having interviewed many people in this series already, some things have come out as quite common themes. Obviously, supply chain constantly comes up in every conversation I have. Two other areas, though, which have come up quite a lot, and I don't know if your members have brought this up as well, is being more sustainable. And what I mean by sustainable is being more green rather than, and then the other thing is obviously the use of AI and machine learning. So again, from your perspective, talking to your members, are those things which are sort of front of mind, or is it, because obviously there is a difference between what people think in Europe to what they think necessarily in the States, and you know, not in everything, but there are certain areas where there's bigger focuses. And I know certainly in Europe, sustainability and being more green has become a big issue within the biopharma space. So is that similarly the case in the States now? And also, what is the impact for AI and machine learning in the US?
So it's an increasingly important topic. I mean, the sustainability to being more green, and I think it's an interesting topic, because I would say how much it is front of mind and implementable, and what challenges it faces depends on where people are in the pharmaceutical life cycle, what products are being made, right? When you look, it's a completely different conversation if you're talking to somebody who makes a legacy product that has been on the market for a long time versus somebody who is a developer of a new drug, where you basically have the opportunity to design your development and manufacturing approaches, and your design space is a completely different one, right?
Sure.
And but it is an increasing conversation. In fact, I've just come out of a planning meeting for our summer scientific forum where it is a topic, and that group is very interested in exploring it. Last year at our summer meeting in Wisconsin, we talked about AI for CMC. How do you apply AI approaches to the CMC space? Which I think is very, very interesting. The challenge is, of course, also the regulatory requirements, right? And what are the other pressures you have? And I think, again, depending on what you're making and the speed at which you have to make it, some things have to be rethought and redone, right? Because especially under the constraints of pandemic manufacturing and speed to patient, a lot of what is happening, especially in the sterile manufacturing space, is single use. And the regulator loves single use because there are a lot of the, cleaning validation, all of those concerns go away. Is single use sustainable? Is it environmentally friendly? Absolutely not, right? So how do we go from, I would say, regulatory necessity to the reality of, where can we introduce it? When can we introduce it? In the end, I think, especially for established product, it's also about change management and, having those conversations between the regulators, the compendia, et cetera, on how to accelerate that, right? I remember when there was a lot of discussion about replacing organic residual solvents and reducing the use of residual solvents, but it's so many different aspects. I think in the future, I would assume that manufacturers will approach that completely differently, and I also challenge that I think it's the hardest for the products that have been on the market for a long time. Some of the essential medicines, some of the generic medicines, introducing those changes that make things more sustainable, more environmentally friendly. There is a cost to that, right? And who carries that cost in the global healthcare system? That's something we have to talk about as well.
Well, that's really interesting. Well, thank you for sharing that with me, Tina. That's really interesting. Now let's talk about AAPS for 2023. You've already touched on a few things that you're doing this year. So what can we expect from AAPS in 2023?
I would say most of all, lots of exciting science. We have a really, really full calendar. We have a lot going on. We have the National Biotech Conference in Philadelphia in April. We're excited about our partnership with Interfax. And so any attendees that come to the NBC meeting in Philadelphia can also attend Interfax at the Javits Center in New York. And we see that as a very exciting collaboration because it extends our reach into the commercialization and technology space. So it's really been a good fit. And then in the summer, we're launching a new conference, the Summer Scientific Forum, which brings together a bioanalytical track and a pharmaceutical analysis track. That meeting will be in Minneapolis in July. And sort of the joint focal point of those two tracks will sort of be the regulatory interface and a really in-depth conversation around bioanalytical challenges. Some of the topics we just talked about, innovation, sustainability, AI, all of those are being discussed right now as the programming committee is meeting.
Right. And
then in the fall, of course, the big event every year is PharmSci 360. We're in Orlando this year. The themes are going to be published here very, very shortly. And the call for papers will open later this month. So that meeting is in full planning. We have a fantastic programming committee for the conference. Very, very energetic, very good ideas and very cool topics. And as we talked about earlier in this conversation, really our desire is to have some of these hot topics, some of these important issues be threaded through the entire year. You know, we call it our 4 seasons of science, and we want to make sure that our members, our partners have the opportunity to continue the conversation throughout the year, both in person and online.
Brilliant. Well, look, we'll make sure we put the link to AAPS above the video so people can click on that and see the full program you've got. Brilliant. Well, look, one last question. So any final thoughts for the viewers out there for 2023?
I'm excited for 2023. I really feel like it's going to be another year where we're going to see a lot of innovation, a lot of changes in our industry, in our science. And so I'm excited for everything that's coming. There's lots of great technology and a lot of good science to discover. So I'm excited for it, and I hope some of your listeners will join us at AAPS for that.
Well, I look forward to it. Well, look, Tina, thank you very much for taking the time out to talk to me today. It's been really interesting. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on various topics. And there you go, viewers. If you'd like to know more about AAPS, you can click on the link above the video. But more importantly, if you have heard Tina and have got any questions or any comments based on what she said, feel free to put them in the comments below, because I'm sure Tina will be only too happy to hear what your thoughts are on what her thoughts were. And so feel free to put those in the comments below. So Tina, thank you very much. Good luck with the planning for all the events this year and all the various things you do. I look forward to hopefully catching up with you in person at one of them at least, if not 2 or 3 of them. And viewers, thank you for watching as always. And until next time, stay well and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.